We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Tuesday, 10:30 on the Eastern Seaboard, coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod, as we always do, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday in this time slot. Reminder, guys, if you haven't already, give us a thumbs up, subscribe if your heart compels you, definitely give us a follow. Tell a friend. Let's double up. Let's get to 10,000 followers here on Rumble. Definitely give a subscribe over on the audio format of the show on iTunes and Spotify and iHeart, any of those platforms, because we're trying to grow there. We're definitely trying to reach more and more Americans so we can radicalize them. It is a brand new week. Today is April 29th. Today is Madam Friend's birthday, but the age, that's classified. Got to keep that one close to the vest, guys. Grateful to have you along with us, though. It's just going to be me again. I aired over the weekend when I told you that at GOB Actual would be back with us. One more episode of just at Real Steve Friend in the seat today. But I've got a lot to get to today, because today we're talking about a shattered judiciary. Lots of problems in the court systems, talking about judges who are stopping bans on DEI, judges who are defending illegal aliens, judges who oppose school choice, and also prosecutors who are offering racist plea deals. So lots of problems in the court. We look to the court, specifically to the judges, as sort of the referees. I think we find ourselves in a unique position right now where it's like a couple that's on the rocks. It's heading towards divorce. You try to break glass in case of an emergency, and you seek out the couples therapist. And then you sit down, husband, wife, therapist, and it seems like the therapist is on one particular spouse's side on everything. And that's what we're seeing from the judges at not just the federal level, but at the state level. So we're going to get to all of that, a whole bunch more today. Glad to have you with me here. Before we do, let's thank the show's sponsor for the day. We're going to go to the OG sponsor of the American Radicals Podcast, and that's the True Earth Pharmacy. TrueEarth.co. TrueEarth.co is where you go, and you use our proprietary promo code, which is AMRAD25, AMRAD25, AMRAD25. That gets you 10% off the entire collection at True Earth. Now, True Earth offers fertilizers for those of you who do some gardening. Check out the squid extract. That's the brand new product. It's been pumped to me and told that let you all know, if you are an American Radical Podcast listener, that you need to check out the squid extract. And if you want to do some personal care, check out what they have in the pharmacy spelled with an F. And they have the black turmeric and the turmeric trio and the mushroom supplements, and also some CBDs, and also some supplements for your fur babies. All of it 10% off at trueearth.co, and the promo code AMRAD25. All right, guys, get ready and dig in. We're going to be talking about lots of court stuff today. We're going to nerd out on it. But I think if you're a consumer of the news, some of this will sound familiar to you, but others might have slipped past the goalie. So let's get to the first one, and let's get to the DEI crackdown that we saw. And this is reported by Politico, which will give us a nice left-wing perspective, but I read it so you don't have to, guys. So a federal judge in New Hampshire issued a temporary injunction last week blocking the Trump administration's directive aimed at curbing race-based diversity, equity, and inclusion practices in K through 12 schools. So this injunction came in response to a lawsuit that was filed by the National Education Association and the American Civil Liberties Union of New Hampshire. So the National Education Association is a teachers union, which is uber concerned about teaching racist theories to the kids, and the ACLU, which Garrett and I have decried the demise and fall of that organization. Well, maybe it's just returning to its roots, because if you talk to people who are appreciators of history, somebody like J. Micah Waller, they'll let you know that the ACLU was originally founded just so they could run cover for communists in America. So maybe they've actually returned to their roots here, as they filed a lawsuit in a federal court, found a nice judge in New Hampshire who was sympathetic, and wanted to stop the Trump administration from giving a directive to schools that you're not going to get funding if you continue to teach students that if you have white skin, you're bad. Back to this report from Politico, get a little bit more details here. Now, the New Hampshire judge, this is 3 different rulings. And I do think it's interesting to talk about the ACLU. They argue that it was a First Amendment violation to stop teachers from teaching the curriculum in public schools. So government officials teaching government curriculum is apparently First Amendment protected activity, according to the ACLU, reliable communist organization. Now, there's a couple of different rulings. One ruling was from Stephanie Gallagher, and she was a Maryland judge. So now we're out of New Hampshire, on to Maryland, and was appointed actually by Donald Trump. And this was a case brought by a different organization, and that included the American Federation of Teachers. Again, back to the teachers' unions, which essentially at this point exist to just ensure that kids are not taught anything productive and teachers continue to get higher and higher salaries. They're not really advocating for education, they're advocating for the quote unquote educators. Now, they delayed the enactment of a letter that came from the Department of Education that asserts that federal law prohibits schools from using race in decisions pertaining to all aspects of education. So the Department of Education under the Trump administration said, you can't use immutable characteristics, notably the color of your skin, to make decisions. And this Maryland judge said, no. They're going to be allowed to continue doing that. And the third ruling here that's cited by Politico was issued in District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., by Judge Dabney Friedrich, another appointee of Donald Trump. And that further blocked the Department of Education from demanding that schools certify their compliance with the Trump administration. The government threats, the judge said, likely violate the Constitution. And here's where I want to get to the point, because you see that 2 of the 3 judges here were appointed by Donald Trump. So you would think that they might be intellectual fellow travelers. I don't know. There were definitely problems with personnel in the first administration, and we're encountering some of those as we've gone into the second administration, but definitely not as prolific. But here's the perspective that I think is worth bringing up. Communists get into power to do something, and quote unquote conservatives get into power to be something. They're interested in the trees, not the forest. They fail to recognize the circumstances on the ground. And as a parent of school-age children, as are many of you, the reality is our public schools suck. They don't teach what we want them to teach. And what they do, in fact, teach is kids to barely get a modicum of literacy, but they're uber confident in themselves. It's the nth degree of the everyone gets a trophy culture in schools today. And beyond that, now we're seeing in some of these districts in these far blue leftist enclaves, like in New Hampshire and Maryland and Washington, D.C., increasingly, they are making the diversity, equity, and inclusion a part of the curriculum, which was why so many parents in those exact districts went to the school boards, and the Biden administration, the Biden DOJ, the Biden FBI sent agents of the government out there to call them terrorists because they wanted to stop that. They wanted to nip that in the bud. But even then, even if you are a dyed-in-the-wool communist, pull the lever for a Democrat every single 2, 4, or 6 years, you recognize that it is not in your child's best interest to be an aggrieved party, to believe that the color of their skin will dictate where they are in life. That is across the board, that's consistent. And still, the judges are finding ways, finding little mechanisms, problems in the process, despite the fact that this country overwhelmingly issued a mandate last November that we wanted this to end. I mean, one of the most effective political ads in the history of presidential politics was Donald Trump comparing himself to Kamala Harris and saying that Kamala is for they, them. I'm for you. It just speaks for itself. And that's why Donald Trump, as a Republican, and he's not really a traditional Republican, he's a Democrat from the mid-90s, he still won the Electoral College and the overall popular vote, the first Republican presidential candidate to do that since 2004. Let's go to another judge, and this one is coming from a reliably conservative state, and yet there's a problem with the process. Let's take it out to Utah, and this is a school choice issue. Judge strikes down Utah's school choice program, leaving kids in limbo. This program, which was enacted by the Utah legislature and signed into law by the governor, it's called the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program. It gives K through 12 students up to $8,000 a year for private school tuition and other costs. Essentially, they determined that the state spends about $8,000 a year on you and your child. So if the public schools are not passing muster, you don't like what they're teaching them, you feel like that there's other alternatives out there, you get a refund of your money and you get to send them to private schools. And what often happens when that $8,000 mark is out there, well, lo and behold, it seems like the free market delivers and tuition is generally going to be around $8,000. So it went into effect in the fall of last year, but here we are again. Teachers unions argued that the program violated Utah state constitution because it diverted income tax revenue to fund private schools. Their argument was that the taxes are taken from the people by the state and they are supposed to be towards the public schools. But the contrary argument to that, which I definitely subscribe to, is that the program didn't affect the state system of public schools, but was in addition to the constitutional requirements. So the state constitution requires that they set up a system of public education. They did that. Some of the citizens said, it sucks. We're going the private route. I want a refund. That seems pretty reasonable. It's a way of doing business. But teachers' unions are very concerned. They want to make sure that your kids continue to get pumped into those public schools. One, because it ensures that more teachers are going to be hired, more students, you need to have more teachers, and then they're going to have a larger bargaining chip. They can say, hey, look, we're going on strike unless you pay us more money. And on top of that, so many of the teachers' unions at this point are corrupted by communists, as are most of the teachers' ranks, and they want a captive audience. For at least 8 hours a day, they're going to pump your kids full of indoctrination into what they want them. And look, I'll get to this later on, and we'll go back to it. We'll revisit my point that we had over the weekend about indoctrination. Now, actually, let's just go to it now. I talked about the fact that I had children because I wanted people to indoctrinate. That's my function as a biological being, as a spiritual being, as a citizen of the country. That's what you're supposed to do. I resent the notion or the argument that too many of the conservatives, too many of the Republicans make that school exists to teach children how to think. It should not exist to teach them what to think. That's crap. I want my children indoctrinated into my ideology because you know what? It's right. I know it's right because if I didn't know it was right, it wouldn't be my ideology. I want to indoctrinate my kids into that. And the schools are not going to further that, or they're not even going to be a neutral arbiter. They're going to do something diametrically opposed to it, like teach my kids that they can cut off their testicles and become a woman. Then that's not going to pass muster for me. And taxation is theft after all. But you would hope, theoretically, if you're going to take some of my dollars, of course, there's the leaky bucket, and so many people are taking their hands into the trough there and collecting what's good for them and lining their pockets. But at the end of it, maybe a little bit, a few shekels will go towards educating the populace for some sort of common good. But that doesn't happen. They indoctrinated them into an ideology where they learn to hate me and my principles and my country and my religion. I object. I want a refund. I should be entitled to do that. But if you happen to reside in Utah now, the judge says that that's a problem. Now, what's the premise here? Why is this judge making that argument? Or how is it making this argument? So, third district judge Laura Scott agreed with the teachers' unions and other plaintiffs, saying that the program violated sections of the state's constitution that required the state to fund public education open to every student that is free of charge, and to use state income tax to fund public schools to support children and people with disabilities. That's retarded. this doesn't affect free education, quote unquote, free education. After all, taxes are theft. They steal your money and then say they're giving you a free good. How is that impacted here? It's not at all. And yet, the judge in Utah sided with the teachers' unions. And as long as we're on the subject of schools and teaching, and we covered down on the Montgomery School District and the fact that they're trying to make students take classes at a low elementary school level of learning about the LGBTQ, AI plus, rainbow kamikaze madness in Maryland. Well, one of the students has actually pushed back, and this is reporting from the Blaze, and she's at risk of actually not graduating. Talking about having having the principles that are necessary. Christian girl can't graduate high school over religious objection to this curriculum. This is according to her family, reported at the Blaze. The student, whose identity has been protected, has a 4.76 GPA. I don't know, maybe I'm too old. I thought it was 4.0, but apparently we're going through Bidenflation as it comes to GPAs. So this student, she has a GPA above 100%. So that's pretty competitive. Also a 1450 on her SATs. That's in the 96th percentile. So should be competitive to go to most colleges. But now it seems like Maryland's not going to allow her to graduate. Despite her excellent records, Montgomery County Public Schools isn't allowing her to graduate because she refuses to complete mandatory health class with LGBTQ plus, rainbow kamikaze, affirming, and religiously discriminatory content. Now, this girl's parents obtained screenshots of the teacher training documents, the curriculum, that ordered teachers to, quote, review LGBTQ plus resources to incorporate a more inclusive language with students and provided them to the news. The guidance also allegedly labels Christians as a privileged group. So you're now forcing your child to sit in there and be berated, struggle session style, Maoist struggle session style, that because you have indoctrinated, as is your right and as is proper, your child into a Judeo-Christian worldview and religiosity, that makes them privileged. From my baseline understanding, I think that anyone can opt into that religiosity. But the teachers in Montgomery County, Maryland, say you can't. And really what they're trying to do is the same thing that the federal government, federal law enforcement, the FBI did, and that is marry privilege to white supremacy. Let's be honest here. If you're a Christian, they're presuming you're probably a white person. I guess they probably need to go to a black church on a Sunday and listen to some singing. Now, back to the Blaze, because this family is continuing to fight. In addition to being called privileged, they labeled non-Abrahamic religions as oppressed. So Muslims oppressed. The family offered to have the daughter take alternative classes to fulfill the health class requirement, but the school district refused. So now this is a girl, young lady, who's at risk of not getting a high school diploma when she's clearly one of the few people, it would seem, who matriculates through the education system in the state of Maryland who is literate. You look at the literacy rates, I think it's basically 0% in Baltimore of third graders can read. She survived. She's actually thrived. Probably has a lot of help on the home front. And yet she was not allowed, her family was not allowed. She refused to bend the knee, refused to submit into the indoctrination. Ergo, you can't have the credential necessary for your future endeavors, because that's what the communists do. They get into power to do something, and that is very simply reward your friends, punish your enemies. And clearly, this young lady and her family, they come from a privileged class, a privileged religiosity. They need to be punished. They don't embrace our worldview, that coming from the teachers' unions, coming from the government of Maryland, coming from this school district specifically, that not just the gender madness, the LGBTQ plus madness, but just government is God. And if you do not do what we want, you shall be punished. Some more court decisions on the horizon here. And then this reporting from Fox News. Trump had an executive order on voting that was just blocked by yet another federal judge. Federal judge in Washington, D.C., as all of them are, dyed-in-the-wool communists, blocked last week a portion of President Trump's executive order on election integrity, specifically provisions related to providing documentary proof of citizenship before being allowed to register to vote. So this executive order came from the Trump administration, said you have to prove that you're a citizen of the country. Provide a document, a driver's license or a birth certificate or a passport, something to that effect, something that is already in your possession. Prove that you are a citizen because only citizens have the right to vote in this country. And a Washington, D.C. federal judge said, no, we're going to stop that from going on through because I'm a dictator in a black robe. I'm not just calling balls and strikes as an umpire here. I'm not an official saying whether or not the receiver caught the ball and got both feet in bounds. No, I'm going to legislate from the bench. I'm going to issue directives that effectively have the force of law. And in fact, I will execute them because if you don't, I'll hold you in contempt. I'm going to put you in jail if you fail to correspond or comport with what my directives are. Now, let's go over to the crazy judge. I know it's been talked about a lot, but it is worth bringing up just because of the noteworthiness of this. This was really the first time over the weekend that we've seen the Department of Justice refocus its efforts on holding the communists accountable for what they did. Reporting from this one NBC News, the FBI arrests a Milwaukee judge alleging she interfered in an immigration operation. Isn't that the face of evil? Now, the complaint says that this judge, Judge Dugan, assisted an illegal alien whose name is Eduardo Flores Ruiz avoid being arrested by federal immigration officials when he was before her at the Milwaukee County Courthouse. He was facing 3 misdemeanor battery counts, so sounds like an upstanding citizen. I mean, look, these are only the best people. It wasn't like just the one-off where he broke our laws by crossing our border. He totally didn't assault somebody, cause physical harm to somebody. The government's supposed to protect you against fraud and force, and yet this judge sympathizes with the illegal alien. Judge Dugan was on the bench when ICE agents appeared in the hallway, and at a courthouse, good deputy told the FBI that Dugan became visibly angry and called the situation absurd. How dare you, sir? When a clerk spoke with her about ICE's presence. Dugan and another unnamed judge then confronted deportation officers in the hallway. They basically ran cover to distract them. This is what the affidavit alleges, and I have read through the affidavit written by a person I think might have been in my FBI Academy class. Judge Dugan asked if they had a judicial warrant. No, quote, no, I have an administrative warrant, said one of the agents. According to the affidavit, Judge Dugan then demanded that the agents speak with the chief judge while members of the arrest team were in the chief judge's chambers. Dugan then escorted, while they were distracted and talking to another judge, she escorted this illegal alien, Flores Ruiz, and his attorney through a back door. Fortunately, 2 federal agents chased him down outside the courthouse and arrested him. This is a lawyer, a judge, elected official who is overseeing criminal trials that might determine whether or not somebody loses their freedom. Someone who's supposed to have a modicum of common sense, a modicum of knowledge about how the criminal justice system functions and operates. But she's an activist. She installed herself. She's going to be a bulwark against legal actions by federal agents who are acting on behalf of a directive from the Attorney General of the United States and the President of the United States to go forth and apprehend criminal, illegal aliens. This guy was sitting in front of her, and she opted to try to protect him against who she deemed to be the oppressors, I'm sure. And I know that she has that perspective because some more information came out about Judge Dugan. Hannah Dugan, Milwaukee County judge, arrested by the FBI for allegedly obstructing federal authorities who were seeking to detain an undocumented immigrant. Thank you very much, NBC. She was a longtime social justice advocate, so a communist. a communist who, like all of them, realizes that she had to find the choke points in our culture. And what did she do? She went to law school. She found herself with a degree and then with a law license and ascended to become a judge at a county level where she can, I'm sure, let vile, vicious, awful criminals off the hook or give them a slap on the wrist, and then instead put herself in the way of the actual men and women of law enforcement who are attempting to do what their directive should be, and that is protect the American citizen against fraud and force. She's going to run cover for the illegal alien. She also worked for Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, which advocates on behalf of illegal aliens. And she's hardly by herself here. I'll throw this photo up. This is another judge. There's actually a few of them now who have come out in support of Judge Dugan. This is a Wisconsin judge, Wisconsin Circuit Judge Monica Isham. She's threatening to refuse to hold court now. This is her protest. She's not even going to do the job that she's been appointed to do. Quote, she put out in an email, I have no intention of allowing anyone to be taken out of my courtroom by ICE and sent to a concentration camp, especially without due process, as both of the constitutions we swore to support requires. Should I start raising bail money? Well, she should. Let her raise bail money for herself because she should be in handcuffs. Another quote, I no longer feel protected or respected as a judge in this administration. Now, a couple of notes about that final quote. She capitalized the J in judge. That's not actually correct grammar, but it is for her because it's a big J judge. That's a hubris issue, as is Judge Dugan, this Judge Isham. Their perspective on things is they are lords, queens atop of the plebeian swine. You're a member of the proletariat. They're in the bourgeoisie. They're communists who feel like it is incumbent on them to lord over you and issue these directives that are going to interfere with the justice system. If a judge refuses to hear a case, now there's a delay. Now there's a logjam. We experienced the same thing during the coronavirus lockdowns. It was another one of the stupid single issue thinking. It's a lack of foresight. It's a lack of thinking down the line. When the federal government told the FBI to stop doing work, they told the federal courts to stop doing work. They said, we're just going to push pause on it. But we can't really do that because crime continues to happen. So, our bad, FBI, continue investigating, even though the courts are shut down. So we did. And then when we arrested people, there was no court to hear them. And it created a backlog in the system. And as a result, to just clear the docket, so many people who were committing crimes and had been arrested for committing those crimes were just kind of cut loose. We don't have the bandwidth to handle it anymore. And this is a judge, Judge Isham, who's effectively trying to hold the system ransom. So now when there is a battery committed by someone, whether or not they're an illegal alien, sorry, we don't have the court to handle it. So we're just going to have to clear this hall. That's a violation of her oath of office. That's a violation of the ideas that we have of a criminal justice system, what's supposed to handle things in an expeditious fashion. I mean, it's even a violation of the due process rights of the bad guy who's been arrested. It's going to be slowed down. And again, back to the due process. I've said it before. I'll say it again. The main focus, the prime directive of anyone within criminal justice system, be they a judge, a prosecutor, an arresting officer, is due process. You follow the law, you gather the facts, you present them, and if those facts and circumstances support a conviction, it's because the facts supported it, not because you did such a darn good job of collecting the evidence or the prosecutor did such a darn good job of presenting it. The victory is in following the process. But that process is guaranteed to American citizens in our Bill of Rights. It's not guaranteed to illegal aliens who invaded. Now, this guy, this Ruiz character, he's not a one-off, personally, individually. He was deported from our country in January of 2013. and he returned. So again, a judge sympathizing with now a twice criminal illegal invader and likely a batterer in a misdemeanor level in the state of Wisconsin. And this Judge Dugan has some air cover from some of her counterparts, including yet another one, another face of evil, who we'll just throw up because was able to. This is yet another judge who's now cited because there's just so many girl bosses, as you can tell for those watching. She's got a turban on and a book of Sonia Sotomayor, the dumbest Supreme Court justice, in the background. So only the best people who are members of the bourgeoisie lording over the proletariat. Transition over now to Hennepin County. That's Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we've talked about this judge, or I'm sorry, this prosecutor over the weekend, because over the weekend we were talking about how the Soros installed prosecutor in Hennepin County, her name is Mary Moriarty, was letting the Tesla damager off, the guy who had keyed like 6 Teslas and done $20,000 in damage. And I'll read the quote that she issued for that one before we get to this story. She said at the time, this is an approach taken in many property crimes cases and helps to ensure the individual keeps their job and can pay restitution, as well as reducing the likelihood of repeat offenses. Now, she's being sort of honest there. Now, she's taking this approach to property crime to ensure that the guy keying the cars can keep his job, right? Because he worked for the government and he's going to pay that forward to the next vile, vicious street communist who does something. He'll use his power and authority and also reduce the likelihood of repeat offenses. No, it's going to encourage more of it. So this same, under that understanding, that same prosecutor has now issued a new directive. And that is that they're going to, in this county, Hennepin County, evaluate plea bargains based on an individual's race. The document that was circulated was entitled Negotiations Policy for Cases Involving Adult Defendants, and it lays out several considerations for prosecutors to take as they negotiate and offer resolutions to criminal defendants. The quote comes from it, and it's a little bit long, but I will read it just to get an understanding of what they're actually advocating for in this county. While racial identity and age are not appropriate grounds for departures, which means on its face, someone's race and their age cannot be used for departing from the guidelines. So if the guideline says you commit a crime, you get typically 5 to 8 years. You can't again then assign the person to 3 years. You have to fit within the guidelines. But we'll continue on. Proposed resolutions should consider the person charged as a whole person, including their racial identity and age. So we've established that racial identity and age cannot be used, but we're going to do it anyway. While these factors should not be controlling, they should be part of the overall analysis. We're going for a holistic appeal here. Racial disparities harm our community, lead to distrust, and have a negative impact on community safety. Prosecutors should be identifying and addressing racial disparities at decision points as appropriate. So what is that really saying? It's really saying that if you look at a person's skin and they happen to be from the right intersectional group, meaning that they are appropriately tan, then they don't get to go to prison as long when you're offering a plea deal. That's completely unconstitutional, completely illegal. In fact, it's very racist. I mean, you look at the prison context and say, hey, there's too many people that look like you in there, so you get a pass. Well, what about the people that are in there? Similarly, you look at the prison population and say, hey, not a lot of people looking like you there, so we're going to send you back to the pokey for a longer period of time. That is not what our system of justice is. We have a shattered judiciary, whether or not it's coming from a judge or a prosecutor. Now, I've talked about this exact thing before. This is a local ordinance. It's coming from a county prosecutor who subscribes to the George Soros ideology. I can think of a federal guy that I've written about before, predecessor to Pam Bondi over at the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland. Uncover DC, written by yours truly, January of 2023. Merrick Garland considers race in sentencing recommendations. Garland's memo at this point, which became public to little fanfare, it sought to apply DOJ's latest interpretations with particular force in drug cases and said that mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines produced disproportionately severe sentences for certain defendants and perceived an actual racial disparities in the criminal justice system. So we took a federal policy from Merrick Garland and are now applying a similar policy at a local level in Hennepin County, Minnesota. But just as a throwaway, I think it's interesting that I haven't seen that policy rescinded. Sure would be nice if maybe someone could get in the ear of Attorney General Bondi and let her know that there are still federal prosecutors, many of the communists who recognize that they could get to that position and continue to implement a Merrick Garland type of policy without her knowledge. And they're going about doing it still. We want to be a law and order culture. That was one of the mandates that came down with the Trump administration, part due. Pam Bondi at the head of the Department of Justice. She's the chief law enforcement officer for the country. That's not going to cut it. That's not going to pass muster. And as long as we're talking about Pam Bondi, and that one is probably out of her awareness, not necessarily her fault, but she should probably endeavor to learn about it. And I'd be happy to get her ear for a couple of minutes on it. I'd also be happy to get in her ear about this new policy, which I do have a problem with. And that is the fact that the DOJ, under Attorney General Bondi, is going to resume a practice of obtaining reporters' records in leak inquiries. The Justice Department is cracking down on leaks of information to news media because so many communists have gotten into government. They're doing the same thing that happened during the first Trump administration, where they just find sympathetic news sources and give them information. So the leaks are aplenty. So Attorney General Pam Bondi said that prosecutors will once again have the authority to use subpoenas, court orders, and search warrants to hunt for government officials who make unauthorized disclosures to journalists. It's a little bit reminiscent of whistleblower laws, because whistleblowers are not protected for leaking to the media. So it's right and just and proper for the DOJ to go after people, particularly if they're releasing sensitive information, they're leaking it to media. But this directive is slipping it backwards. They don't know who the leaker is, but they know that a particular journalist from a particular outlet is reporting it. Ergo, they know that the leaker is likely a source for that journalist. So let's just work backwards. Let's issue a search warrant for that journalist's contact information. A little bit problematic with that. And I can think of actual Supreme Court precedent that says that that's not allowed. Garrett and I have talked about it before on Whistleblower History episode. There's a little thing called the Pentagon Papers that sort of laid out that that might be actually allowed. Let's give this one a play.
On Sunday, June 13th, 1971, the New York Times published a report that would change history.
Their source was Daniel Ellsberg, a military analyst working for the government, and the report, which would soon become known as the Pentagon Papers, included top secret and incriminating information about the Vietnam War. Between 1967 and 1969, Ellsberg worked on a classified project for the government called United States-Vietnam Relations 1945-1967, a study prepared by the Department of Defense. The Pentagon Papers were not a good look for the United States government. Ellsberg research showed that there were many military miscalculations and even flat-out lies told by politicians about U.S. involvement in Vietnam. But why did Ellsberg decide to leak the papers to the New York Times? While working on the project, he realized he no longer supported the Vietnam War and thought it was unwinnable. In October of 1969, concerned that the public was being lied to, he began photocopying the report. He leaked some documents to members of Congress, but none of them went public. So in 1970, Ellsberg leaked portions to the New York Times and the Washington Post.
So Mr. Ellsberg, he tried, as is often the case, to go about things the right way. He said, look, the way that we are prosecuting this war in Vietnam, there's some problems with it. And as that video will get into, it was transcending one presidential administration to another, to another, to another. It was hardly partisan issue where it was a Democrat or Republican. It was kind of across the board. And it fell on deaf ears. So he felt a moral obligation and said, I'm going to go forward and leak this to Washington Post and New York Times. Now, that means that he's not technically going to get whistleblower protection because there could be adverse actions taken against him for that. And there probably justifiably could. I mean, they should probably fire a guy who's leaking sensitive military information. But are you allowed in our system to go after the media outlets to work your way back to get Mr. Ellsberg? Well, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Let's pick that up back on our video.
The court decided that under the freedom of press, the government did not have a strong enough case to censor the press. Nixon lost the fight, and the articles were printed. Ellsberg was still indicted under the Espionage Act for leaking government secrets. He could have been sentenced to 115 years in prison, but the charges were dropped after evidence of governmental misconduct came to light. Although the Pentagon Papers did not include any details on Nixon's conduct in Vietnam, the president was embarrassed by the publications. He subsequently sought to discredit Ellsberg by using a team he called plumbers. They broke into Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office to try to uncover embarrassing or harmful information that might make Ellsberg look bad. This was the same group of burglars who'd become famous for their role in the Watergate scandal. It didn't work. Ellsberg was free, and together with the New York Times, set a new precedent for the press, a responsibility to tell the truth, even if it means publishing classified documents.
Even if it means publishing classified documents, you can't go after the media outlet. I don't understand how this has eluded the Attorney General of the United States' attention. Why would you give the communists this cannon fodder? They're already coming at you with bullcrap. They're already saying that illegal aliens have a right to habeas corpus and due process. They're already saying that you cannot stop teachers in schools from teaching kindergartners that it's just fine to cut off your genitals and that Harry can become Sally. Why would you fall into this trap that is already established, particularly as it pertains to Vietnam when you make a connection to the Pentagon Papers? I mean, Donald Trump's pretty much on record as not liking war. I imagine he would not a fan of Vietnam. I think there's actually a substantial amount of footage of him talking about how he didn't agree with it. And I think he used bone spurs, in fact, to avoid having to go fight. This is an own goal. And this is, again, another example, and we call balls and strikes on this show, of a shattered judiciary. In this case, it's from the prosecutor's office, from the DOJ. The Attorney General of the United States re-implementing this is a mistake, and it's an error. Now, Ellsberg, as the whistleblower there, he was facing down some significant time. He wound up triumphing, but the violations that he experienced along the way, I mean, Richard Nixon sending his WetWorks team in to go and break and get files on him from his personal psychiatrist to say that this guy was crazy to discredit him. I mean, I know a little bit of something about that, as does Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen, the other suspendables. Look, our government betrayed us wholly and tried to discredit us under the Biden administration. So I take this opportunity to transition to another one that was revealed to us yesterday, because for those who tracked it, the press office for the White House had sort of a unique press briefing where they pushed aside the New York Times and the Washington Posts of the world, and they wanted to get the social media influencers. It's a new day here. It's a new media. So they invited them in and they asked them to present their questions so they can go directly to the American people. And a friend of the program, Brianna Morella, was able to toss out some questions to her buddies who were in the room. And they asked about a status update for Garrett, myself, and the others. And I don't know if you're aware, but we'll give this one a play.
The DOJ stated on Friday that they were floating the idea of potentially subpoenaing journalists to get access to whistleblowers. We know the last administration did not treat whistleblowers very well. There's numerous ones who, although still employed by the FBI or the DHS, have not received back pay and they've been employed but they're not reinstated. So I'm wondering, does this administration have, do they believe that we should reinstate the whistleblower, like Agents Garrett or O'Boyle or Friend or, Stevenson with DHS, who blew the whistle on the child trafficking involving the cartels under Joe Biden? He too is yet to be brought back. Do we have a position on that?
Sure. Well, for each individual agency, the secretaries of those agencies obviously have deference over who they hire, who they fire, who they promote. I can tell you certainly the president commends anyone who steps out and speaks the truth, especially against the malpractice that we saw over the last 4 years under the previous administration. I could speak to the two cases at the Treasury Department. The two whistleblowers there who blew the whistle on the Hunter Biden tax fraud case have been promoted by Secretary Bessent. So certainly we commend anyone who has the courage to step up and speak the truth. And as for those who unfortunately try to leak, especially classified information to the legacy media to put our troops in harm's way, our law enforcement officials at harm's way, leaks like that will not be tolerated. But those who are seeking to protect.
Well, kind of a non-answer, if we're going to be completely honest there. I mean, good on the IRS, Scott Bessent over there at the Treasury to make sure that he promotes those two whistleblowers. We had Ziegler and Shapley. In fact, I think Shapley is running the whole darn thing at the IRS right now. But that was sort of in line with the Jen Psaki circle back to you type of answer there. Say that they stand for and admire and support people coming forward for the right reasons, the right time, the right way. And yet, we're over 950 days here for @Real Steve Friend. So we're going to keep up the pressure, hopefully. The social media influencers there who have the ear of the press secretary, Carolyn Levitt, who theoretically has the ear of the president of the United States and other principals within the administration. Keep raising this concern because I don't think a guy like Garrett O'Boyle should suffer as Mr. Ellsberg did, particularly because Ellsberg did leak to the media. Garrett O'Boyle didn't, and it's actually been documented and proven, and yet he's still here 31 months later. Let's go out and get off of the judiciary element, but back to the racist stuff that's been going on in these communist enclaves. Saw this about a forgivable loan program in the state of Washington. But again, immutable characteristics are going to be the defining feature. So this is the governor of the state of Washington announcing a new change to the laws that that state is putting forward about loans for property.
Feel free to step right up.
Yes,
Let's
you're
do
part
it.
of history now.
This is great. Okay. Washington State's Covenant Homeownership Program provides down payment and closing cost assistance for lower income, first-time home buyers. Lawmakers created the program to address the disproportionate impacts of racial redlining in Washington State. House Bill 1696 modifies the program by adjusting the area median income threshold for program eligibility, introducing loan forgiveness, and modifying the Oversight Committee membership. This modification will create more opportunities to close the racial homeownership gap, which is a very important goal for all of us here in Washington State. We so appreciate everybody who made this legislation possible. We know it's been, like any legislation, challenging.
Yes.
This one has its share of challenges, as we know.
Yes.
But Representative Taylor has been a real champion of this legislation, and so we appreciate your leadership in particular. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm pleased to sign this legislation into law. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And let's take a photo.
1, 2, and 3.
Look at all those faces of evil, including the governor of the state of Washington there. It's a little bit hard to understand what the heck he's talking about, especially if you're not paying attention to what's going on with legislative action in the state of Washington. But I went over to Daily Wire and they did decent reporting on what it is. Lawlessness. Washington Democrat governor signs a bill giving racial preference in forgivable housing loans. Basically what it amounts to is that the state of Washington is going to loan money to people to buy houses, to have a down payment on a house. That loan will be forgiven, i.e. just erased, just expensed to the taxpayer in the state of Washington if you pay taxes, and they have some pretty high rates there, if you are a racial minority. that's completely illegal. So instead of focusing in on journalists getting leaks, I would be more interested in seeing a Pam Bondi take this one up aggressively. Instead of opening yourself up to yet another line of attack in the courts, why don't you go on offense here and say that this is one of the 50 states of the union that is persecuting its own citizens? It is engaged in theft from its citizens. It's not just taxation, and taxation is allowed. No, you're actually taking money from some citizens and giving it to another citizen, and it's not based on anything other than the pigment of their skin. I'm pretty sure we have a constitutional amendment about that. That would be more fertile ground. I would like to see that pushed forward to a court system. And we can maybe have it elevated eventually to Amy Barrett and John Roberts and Neil Gorsuch. And hopefully they will have had their Metamucil in the morning, their morning glory, and realize that that is patently unconstitutional, illegal, immoral, and unethical, and end it, as opposed to having to re-adjudicate the Pentagon Papers, which have been settled law for 50 years, and I advocate on behalf of as well, because I do believe in the First Amendment, unlike the ACLU, which brings lawsuits on behalf of teachers' unions to ensure that DEI is taught. I actually think that civil liberties are important. Now, we got another executive order, which will be on tap to be challenged yet again. And I don't think that I'm going out too far on a limb to see this one, but it is worth bringing to your attention because it is excellent reporting by the Daily Signal, and it is also worth laughing at federal workers. So, reporting at the Daily Signal, under this Trump executive order, federal unions may no longer be able to protect poor performers. Can you imagine being the attorney or the plaintiff in a lawsuit that says that the federal government discriminated based on you because you were a bad performer, and that should not be a grounds for a removal? But as it's reported here at the Daily Signal, the executive order deems that national security, which includes defense, border, foreign relations, energy, pandemic preparedness, prevention, response, cybersecurity, economic defense, public safety, I mean, just basically all the things. That's what this executive order applies to. It's sort of in line with when Ronald Reagan fired all the FAA workers because he said, look, you have a essential responsibility here. You can't just go on strike. You're all fired. But contrary to private sector unions and state and local government unions, where the biggest bargaining chips are pay and benefits, federal employee unions are prohibited already from bargaining for pay. Now, collective bargaining between state workers and their government is completely broken. It makes no sense. There is nobody in the room representing the taxpayer who's on the hook for paying the government workers, because the politician theoretically represents the people because they're elected to office and they're there to be a good steward of the tax dollars. But we really know what happens is, and that is that unions form for state government workers and they donate to the politicians. So the politicians give them a sweetheart deal when they have contract negotiations. But at the federal level, most employees are on the GS pay scale. It's statutorily mandated what you can make and how quickly you can advance. So what is the purpose for a federal government union? Well, Daily Signal does a pretty good job of identifying some of the things that they do. It's basically fringe benefits. They argue over things like parking spaces and whether or not they're allowed to work from home, as well as workplace minutia, such as how tall the cubicles have to be, designated smoking areas, and the right to wear spandex at work. Excellent examples pulled by Daily Signal. The real loss to federal employee unions and gain to taxpayers is in unions, according to this executive order, is their ability to shelter bad actors and poor performers. And that's not going to happen anymore. More federal employees will be working on agency missions now as well. You can't shield poor performers, and you can't have quote unquote official time. Garrett and I discussed this as it pertained to the Transportation Security Administration. That's where they have a union activity where somebody is paid by you, the taxpayer, as an employee of the TSA, but they're not actually achieving the mission of the TSA, where they're focusing in on screening people as they go to fly on an airplane, see if we can find a weapon or any sort of contraband. Instead, all they do with their day is union related activity, and yet they draw a government paycheck. That's going to be gone. There are significant numbers of people who 100% of their time is dedicated to just working on union matters, as opposed to what they theoretically clicked apply to do when they apply to work for Uncle Sam. All right, we've got one more story that I want to get to today, just because it caught my eye and it is unrelated to everything we've been talking about today, but maybe it kind of is. And that is a report from the New York Times, which is entitled "How These Little Elves Turned into a Global Sensation." And if you see from the picture there, those are some faces of evil there in those dolls. I've used that illusion several times today. They're called Labubu dolls. They're fuzzy little Nordic elves with snaggletooth, mischievous grins, and impish ears. They're all female. They're all kind hearted, but sometimes, as they go about spreading joy, they get into trouble. These creatures were conceptualized in 2015, a decade ago, by this guy from Hong Kong. It started out as a children's book series, but in 2019, the inventor, whose name is Kasing Lung, signed a partnership with Pop Mart and turned the storybook elves into collectible designer toys. So they're basically Beanie Babies a generation later. Pop Mart's first Labubu series, called The Exciting Macaron, was released in 2023. So now almost back to present day. Each time the new Labubu is released, it is sold out within minutes online. Each doll costs roughly, get this, guys, $30. The company reported $1.8 billion in revenue last year. One of the ways that Pop Mart has built interest in the dolls is by releasing some of them in a blind box. So you buy a box and don't even know which doll is in it. So the buyers don't know which is hidden inside. And that strategy is, quote, keeping fans interested and constantly on their toes. At 10 p.m. Eastern Time last week on Thursday, the day before the new Labubu line was to release in U.S. stores, the dolls were supposed to drop online, but there was so much traffic on the website and the app that it crashed. And when the site and the website came back up, all the dolls had already been sold off. I alluded to how this could possibly be related to what we were talking about today. The craziness that we have seen from judges. I talked about the one Milwaukee judge. We didn't even talk about the other one who allowed a Trende Aragua gangbanger to live in his house. But the one in Milwaukee who helped evacuate an illegal alien out of the courthouse to elude federal law enforcement professionals. Or judges that say, you do not have the right to send your kid to the school you want. Or we're going to fight you as a school board on whether or not your kid can opt out of the rainbow kamikaze madness indoctrination that we are shoving down his or her throat. And they wouldn't say his or her, they would probably say they, them. All of these things are allowed to happen because there are just too many darn Norm and Norma norms in the suburbs who are not paying attention, and they're too focused on getting a Labubu doll because it's, quote, an investment. All right, so as we round out today, as I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try to fill the biggest shoes, and that's actually the biggest shoes because Garrett O'Boyle is enormous, and that is leave you with a nice biblical reference today. And I'm going to go to Isaiah chapter 10. What sorrow awaits the unjust judges and those who issue unfair laws. They deprive the poor of justice and deny the rights of the needy among my people. They prey on widows and take advantage of orphans. What will you do when I punish you? When I send disaster upon you from a distant land? To whom will you turn for help? Where will your treasure be safe? You will stumble along as prisoners or lie among the dead, but even then the Lord's anger will not be satisfied. His fist is still poised to strike. So maybe we won't see justice against some of these crazy judges and prosecutors and school boards in this life. But we can take comfort in having the faith that ultimately, if you've read the last page, you know where they're going to end up. All right, for today's palate cleanse, got a fun one. And this was making the rounds. I don't know if it's true or not, but I hope it is. And even if it isn't, it's still darn funny. This is what happens if you encounter a Karen, a worst person on earth, the white woman from the suburbs who will cut the genitals off her own children to impress her friends at brunch on an airplane. And if you play your cards right, you just might end up in first class. And that is not it, guys. I'm sorry.
I can't sit next to this thing.
No worries. I'm going to go speak to the captain.
Please speak to the captain. Please.
Right back.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Ah! Oh my God, he's assaulting me. I knew it. Oh, you maggots, you just hit me. Oh! Please don't call a medic. Medic, I need a medic right away.
I didn't do it. I just reported that. I didn't do it.
Oh, I need a medic right now.
She's crazy.
He assaulted
me.
me.
Calm down, okay? We have a solution.
Yes.
I did speak to the captain, and he does agree that nobody should be
Oh,
in this
thank
position
you.
for it.
Oh,
So
thank you
we
so
do have
much.
a seat available in first class.
Thank you
Sir,
so
if you want to
much.
come with me, I'm going to escort you to first class, okay?
No,
Ma'am, you are welcome to sit in
No,
this
you're
seat.
doing the wrong
Please
thing
don't
right
put
now.
your
You're doing the
seatbelt.
wrong thing. You know what?
This
You don't know who I
is
am.
the
You don't know who I am, but you are going to get the worst reviews, and I feel like you're going to be grounded for a long time. This is your fault.
I understand.
I don't even think you talked to the captain. Get this maggot out of my way, please. Get out of
I
here,
will
maggot.
the captain will speak to you later, ma'am, okay?
Later, I want.
Look, we found something finally that Karens are good for, and that is free upgrades to business class. All right, guys, I want to thank you again for joining us today. If you haven't already, make sure that you smash the thumbs up, give us a follow, subscribe to the audio format on iTunes and Spotify and iHeart. We'll be back with you Thursday. Garrett has assured me he's getting home Wednesday. Hopefully, he won't be too down and tired to join us, and that'll be at 10:30 Eastern time on rumble.com/amradpod. And until that next time, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.